I had no reason to get in trouble. But when I was a little kid, 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, even 10 years old, if you'd have said, Sam, what are you going to be when you grow up? I'd have told you I'm going to be a preacher one day. But at 11 years old, going to the secular school, I have a big heart for kids here in America that's in a secular school. They go through things that we forgot about. And at 11 years old, I started wanting to fit in with the kids that I thought was cool. I'm thinking in my mind, man, those kids are cool. They're smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana. And all of a sudden, I started doing what they was doing. So by the time that I was 12 years old, I'm going to booze parties, 13 years old, eating acid, popping pills, 14 years old, snorting coke. I'm fitting in. Everybody likes Sam Childers. I become the most popular kid in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Everyone knew me. At 15 years old, I didn't care if I fit in anymore. I found myself waking up every morning, putting a needle in my arm, shooting up heroin, cocaine.
At 15, you
At
started
15
heroin.
years old, yeah. I left home before my 16th birthday. Started selling drugs. Like the documentary, there's a doco out there that was done. A guy that they interviewed said, I never known anyone at 15 or 16 years old that walked around with a suitcase full of drugs. And I did. I mean, I'm talking when I was 16, 17 years old, I would have $50,000 worth of drugs in my possession. Nowadays, we're talking $250,000, $300,000. That's what they'd be worth. So I started selling drugs in Grand Rapids, and then I started running drugs from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, Minneapolis to Chicago to Orlando, Florida. There was a time in my life I became a shotgunner, hired gun for drug deals. My life went out of control. I was in my 20s living in Orlando, Florida, and I'm skipping over a lot, but I'm living in Orlando, Florida, and I get into a really bad bar fight. That bar fight's what changed my life. And a lot of people, when I get to this part of my testimony, if I'm in a church, people start thinking, oh, that's when he gave his life to the Lord. No, it wasn't. That's when I made up my mind, I'm done living this life. And I was in the back of this bar, and there was people got shot, people got stabbed. I was beat up really bad, and I looked at the front door. And I remember I made up my mind, if I make it to that front door, I'm done living this life. I made it to the front door. I went home, told my wife that night, which was from the movie Lynn, and she was a stripper at the time, and I said, we're moving. And she got all worked up because in her heart, she wanted a way out. And she said, what happened? And I says, I got into a fight, and I know someone's going to end up killing me for nothing. See, I'd never had a problem with dying, but I have a problem with what I'm about to die for. If I'm going to die for something, I want it to be worthwhile. I want it to be something that can be written on a tombstone. I don't want to die for nothing, for a bar fight or a jealous husband or anything like that. I want to die for something worthwhile. So we moved over 1,000 miles away back to my hometown where people didn't really know me very well. They knew me as a little kid, heard stories about me, but I was able to walk away from the biker world. I was able to walk away from friends, anyone that done drugs. I could walk away from drugs. And for 2 years, I lived a clean life. And my wife started going to church. And over that 2 years, she would ask me every Sunday, honey, will you go to church? Will you go to church? And I always tell people, you know, if you got a nagging wife, you got to shut them up. Just do what they want, you know. So she kept asking me for 2 years to go to church, and I couldn't take it no more. So I wanted to shut her up, so I went to church and gave my life to Christ. And then all of a sudden, I find myself on a mission trip in Africa.
Rewinding real quick. You didn't go through any rehabilitation or anything?
No, I didn't go through any rehab. I mean, at 15 years old, I would usually shoot up 3 times a day. Yeah, at 15 years old, in the morning. And back in my days, I was really heavy into cocaine. And the cocaine back then, you had to set on the toilet when you shot it up. And most guys know what I'm saying, because it would just relieve you so much, you know. But by the time I was 19 years old, and my addiction was a really strong addiction. I mean, at 19, 20, 21 years old, I had it all. Motorcycles, guns, women, drugs, I had it all. But I tell people, I speak in a lot of rehabs around the world. I've spoken rehabs on this tour. And a lot of people have a hard time grabbing on to my message, because you can do it, but you have to want it. That's the biggest problem is, see, sometimes we still want that drugs, we still want that excitement more than we want clean. And it's hard. I understand that, man. I mean, I went through it all. Imagine most of your addicts nowadays got to steal. They got to steal to be able to support their habit. I just sold drugs to support mine. And I didn't sell a little bit, I sold a lot. So I literally, it was a mental game for me. But the only way I did it, see, there was a key. Now, if somebody hears this show and they say, I can't do it, you can do it, but you got to leave all your friends. You got to leave your relatives. You got to leave the club. I left the club world for years. There's a 5-year grace. And what I mean by that, so many times people leave, but then a year later or 6 months later, they say, I'm going back to help my friends. You're not going to be able to help your friends, because it takes 5 years to be clean. For me, I left it all for 10 years. 10 years of my life, I never had a drink. I never had a problem with drinking. Now, I love to have a glass of scotch now, good scotch. I drink the most expensive scotch I can get, because I know I won't drink much. You know, just maybe a couple drinks every night. But I mean, I left it for over 10 years. Now I can be at the clubhouse. I can be with friends, family, anybody drinking, doing drugs. It don't bother me, don't affect me. I don't have any crave for it. Don't even think about doing any drugs, you know.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes, so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.